Well, good evening, friends. My name is Sister Mary Beth Ham, and on behalf of the Board of Directors of Friends in Solidarity, I welcome you to this wonderful presentation tonight. I am the chair of the Board of Friends in Solidarity, and I'm zooming in tonight from Reisterstown, Maryland, and would love to have a sense of who you are and where you're coming from. And so I invite you to put your name in the chat to let us know who you are and where you live. And so let us begin tonight with prayer, knowing that our good and loving God gathers with us and unites us to the people of South Sudan. When Pope Francis visited South Sudan in February of this year, his visit took the form of an ecumenical pilgrimage for peace in the company of the Archbishop of Canterbury and the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. Together they prayed with the South Sudanese people and called for unity. The three voices were one, issuing a powerful appeal for peace and reconciliation in the divided nation. So as we begin tonight, I thought it would be meaningful to offer some of Pope Francis's words to the people of South Sudan for our reflection. And in the words of Pope Francis, I gather here with you in the name of Jesus Christ, the God of love, the God who achieved peace through his cross. Jesus, crucified in the lives of so many of you, in so many people in this country. Jesus, the risen Lord, the victor over evil and death. Great numbers of children born in recent years in this country have known only the reality of camps for displaced persons. They have absolutely no memory of what it means to have a home. They are losing their connection with their native land, their roots, and their traditions. In the name of Jesus and of his beatitudes, let us lay down the weapons of hatred and revenge in order to take up those of prayer and charity. This country, so beautiful yet ravaged by violence, needs the light that each one of you has, or better, the light that each one of you is. Never lose hope and lose no opportunity to build peace. May hope and peace dwell among you. May hope and peace dwell in South Sudan. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
And so, my friends, on this International Day of Living Together in Peace, it is a pleasure for me to introduce to you Sister Mūmbi Kīgūtha, a sister of the precious blood from Dayton, Ohio, and the new president of Friends in Solidarity, the U.S. partner of Solidarity with South Sudan. Our presentation tonight will be in a conversational format between Sister Mūmbi and Sister Ann Astrick, who is a sister of the Immaculate Heart of Mary from Monroe, Michigan, and a board member of Friends in Solidarity. Tonight, we will hear about Mūmbi's experience of Pope Francis's visit in South Sudan and her experiences visiting Juba, Yambio, and Ramenze. As you listen to this conversation, we invite you to use the chat box for questions or comments throughout the presentation. We also want to share that a generous donor has provided a matching grant of $5,000 for this webinar. All donations made to Friends in Solidarity between May 16th and May 31st will go a long way in supporting the life-changing ministries in South Sudan. And the good news is we have already received some donations. So now I turn the program over to Sisters Mūmbi and Ann.
Thank you, Mary Beth, and welcome. Thank you so much for making time to be with us tonight. I would be remiss not to mention the situation in Sudan before we continue with South Sudan. On April 15th, conflict broke out in Khartoum, the capital city of Sudan, between two military groups. This continued conflict has already displaced more than 1 million people. And its effect on South Sudanese people is that so many who had been living in Sudan as refugees since the 2013 conflict are now returning back to South Sudan, looking for safe shelter and a place where they can be free of the fighting. There's not been as much international attention on Sudan as perhaps the war in Ukraine, but I'd like you to keep it in mind that there is a country right now facing ongoing conflict where a lot of its nationals who are seeking safe shelter and passage to other countries are being denied the prima facie status usually given to citizens of countries engaged in war. I'd also like to share a bit about Friends in Solidarity. What I've encountered during my short time since joining Solidarity with South Sudan and Friends in Solidarity's work is the confusion between the two. Friends in Solidarity is the US partner of Solidarity with South Sudan, which started as a mission of the UISCG, the International Union of Superior Generals and the Union of Superior Generals in Rome, soon after South Sudan was declared an independent country. Solidarity with South Sudan continues to exist, and we exist as their US partners, communicating about South Sudan, but also raising funds for the important work and the projects in South Sudan that you're going to be hearing about in this webinar and others. In the chat, you'll soon see a link of a documentary done by David Moore of ABC News, who traveled to South Sudan earlier this year, showing the devastating effects of climate change on the country, a region where some of our students come from and where we ran an in-service teachers training program for a long time, has been under flooding for 4 years with no hope of relief in sight. The area is now doubly afflicted because they would get their food supplies through Sudan, but now because of the fighting, a large part of South Sudan that relies on the road networks and the infrastructure of Sudan to get their supplies are no longer able to get them. So please keep this ongoing conflict at the back of your mind and in your prayers, even as we continue this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, Mūmbi.
Good evening.
It's my pleasure to be your conversation partner tonight. So let's begin. On February 3rd, 4 dignitaries arrived in South Sudan. Pope Francis, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, Ian Fields, moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, and you, Sister Mūmbi Kīgūtha, the new president of Friends in Solidarity. When you landed in Juba, the capital, on that day, what was that trip like from the airport to the city? It seems like it could have been pretty challenging.
Actually, I was surprised that it was not. I had a very short flight to Juba because I spent the previous month in Kenya, which from the map on your screen you can see is on the lower south side of South Sudan. And I was flying into Juba, the capital city. And the Solidarity with South Sudan folks in Juba had told me they wouldn't be able to meet me at the airport because they had already received notification that no cars would be allowed into the airport because of the Pope's visit. And so they had asked me to find a taxi and find my way to the community, which would be nearby. And so, of course, you arrive in a new country, that trepidation. But the first thing when the plane taxied and kind of came to a halt was seeing this huge banner of Pope Francis dripping the side of the airport building. And we got off and went through the health screening because of COVID. And quickly I was in the terminal. It's a small airport. And I was out within minutes. But what struck me was that so many of the airport employees, including immigration, various security agents, because of the Pope who was coming in 2 hours' time, all bearing the image of Pope Francis on their clothes, whether in t-shirts or little badges, and the palpable excitement. And then getting into a taxi and driving a short distance, but in that short distance, crowds, hundreds, thousands of people lining the streets, all dressed up, singing in jubilation. The Pope's plane had not yet landed, but you could tell there was so much excitement about this visit to South Sudan.
People came from great distances to see Pope Francis and his traveling companions, and most of them walked. From the map we just saw, South Sudan looks like a small country, but how far and how long did people walk to get to Juba for this visit?
So the group from Rumbek is known because they did their walk as a pilgrimage, 400 kilometers, all the way to South Sudan. The bishop, the sisters, the priests walking alongside the people of God, and it took a week. And I happened to sit next to one of the Loreto sisters who walked during the Pope's audience with religious, and you could see the blisters on her feet, but she was filled with so much joy. The story of Rumbek is particularly striking because the bishop there had been shot in both legs a while back, and the fact that he had fully recovered and was able to make this walk with his people. In my following days, I came to realize just what people went through trying to get to Juba because of the poor infrastructure in the country. I had to take a flight to every solidarity project to make it there in good time because of the lack of proper roads, the lack of security, the flooding, all these factors. So then realizing the economics situation for most people, you realize the sacrifices they made to make it there.
Mm-hmm. So those early days that you spent in South Sudan were really a wonderful time of unity, peace, safety, and hope for the people of South Sudan.
Yes, and acclimating to the hot temperatures. I think that's the first thing that struck me when I got there. It was all very well organized. In all the venues we went to for the various Pope events, passing out water, the jubilation, no pushing and shoving, people just happy and excited. Sometimes you see large crowds and you're scared, but everything transitioned so well. And I remember this time after the Mass on Sunday, trying to make our way out of the stadium, and there was a giant screen showing the Pope's progress from the stadium to the airport. And as he was being bid farewell, and everybody came to a halt, still trying to grasp those final moments of the Pope's journey, even though we're seeing them on a giant screen. It was beautiful to experience and watch. And the highlight was really when he got on the papal mobile and drove around the stadium waving at everybody. That was people's first experience of seeing him up close throughout the entire stay. It was beautiful.
Looks like a very friendly and very patient crowd.
Extremely, extremely. And arriving hours before every single event, they had asked people to be there 3 to 4 hours before. And I know of people who spent the night waiting in certain venues to see him, all very peacefully. This was this picture when he met with the clergy and religious. That was the first official event. And in the cathedral, just waiting. And I have to say, even though his message was in Italian and many of us could not follow, there's something about listening to this man, I think, who symbolizes such a different way of being for so many of us in the church that makes you just want to be in that space.
So Mūmbi, after the crowds dispersed, you spent some time in Juba at the headquarters of Solidarity with South Sudan. What was that experience like for you, and who did you meet there?
I met Father Jim on the left, a white father from Ireland, who is the executive director of Solidarity with South Sudan based in Juba. Brother Philippe, a De La Salle brother from Spain, who is the project manager. There were also many religious from our other solidarity projects who had come in for the Pope's visit. We have our wonderful lay collaborators doing extraordinary work, like Samuel, who literally ensured that I was able to get where I needed to be at any one time. That's Samuel with his smiley face. And whatever I asked, it was never too much. You know, every good ministry needs the go-to person. And for me, Samuel embodied it. If it was looking for cough drops, he said, I'll call a shop in town and see whether they have them. If I needed something, he always knew how to fix the situation. And so solidarity not only serves as a hub for solidarity members, but also a place where so many missionaries and both religious and lay come through or stay in when they're in Juba for different official functions. So it's a beautiful place to be at the dinner table because you never know who you're going to meet.
And missionaries from other Christian churches and other denominations as well?
I didn't meet any there, but I do know that the collaboration between the Catholic Conference and other bishops' conferences in South Sudan is particularly strong. Yes, and it was a ecumenical pilgrimage. So the Pope's events, apart from the visit with the clergy and religious on the first morning, it was always a ecumenical representation at all times.
All right, so after leaving Juba, and you've already told us about the challenges in terms of infrastructure in the country, what was your next stop on your journey?
My next stop was Yambio. If you look at this map, it's towards the left near the border of Democratic Republic of Congo and Central African Republic. And I took a flight there about 4 days after arriving. And it's where we have our Solidarity Teachers Training College.
That looks like, I think I've heard that Yambio is also the breadbasket of South Sudan. Is that correct?
So Yambio is located in the state, Western Equatorial State, and what strikes you really is how green it is. I went through during the dry season, but there are huge mango trees. I mean, ginormous. I never knew mango trees could grow that tall and big. But even around the airstrip where I landed, there were these huge mango trees, a lot of trees and plants. And everybody does tell you that you should have come during the rainy season because there's an abundance of food in this area. So this is the breadbasket of South Sudan, and it borders Central African Republic and Congo. And as you know, Congo is one, as we say, is one of the one lung of the world. You know, the Congo jungle and the Amazon, and so that's an area known for abundant rainfall and great agricultural climate.
And it's the home of the Solidarity Teacher Training College, which trains primary teachers. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. And I have to mention that previous to Yambio, this teachers training college was in a different part of the country in Malakal. But during the conflict of 2013, the school was destroyed as in the bombings, and it was finally located in Yambio. And we have students from all over South Sudan, but also the Nuba Mountains in Sudan. And this picture just shows a few minutes after I'd arrived. I wondered why Sister Elizabeth, who's not pictured here, was frantically trying to make a phone call as we drove up to the gate of the institution, a very short distance from the airstrip. And then she finally said, Chris, we are approaching the gate. And I said, what are you planning? Then the gates were opened and the students were there singing and dancing, and I got off the car. It was a wonderful way to arrive at the first Solidarity project. And then we walked down to where the community Solidarity missionaries live. And then the students went back to class. But pictured here is Sister Shufang, an FMM sister from Taiwan serving, and she's a computer expert. And so she does a lot of work in computer and literacy training.
So how many teachers and students are at STTC?
I wouldn't be able to tell you the exact number of teachers, but hazarding a guess, because I did sit in a staff meeting, I would say maybe 12 to 14. However, 37 new students had enrolled a few months before I got there. And for the first time in the history of Solidarity, we had achieved gender parity in recruitment, an ongoing struggle, because we do prioritize female education, but it's not always easy to get them to come. And so it was something that everybody was very proud of. There were 37 enrolled, and there was the first inaugural class of diploma students. So the STTC program is a primary teachers training program which offers a certificate. It's a 2-year program, fully residential. And some of the challenges actually faced in recruitment is that students have to come and stay with us for the entire 2 years of the duration of their studies and rarely get to go home just because of the distance and the cost involved. And so when trying to recruit, for instance, women for this project, some of the challenges we face is this. Some may not have the necessary qualifications to go into a tertiary education institution, but also some might be married and have children or be caring for elderly parents. And I met students who have children who hadn't seen them for 1.5 years. So it's a huge sacrifice and commitment to come be a student at our school. But what you meet is such a desire to learn and such a desire to change the trajectory of their country. Just to mention that our teachers training college is one of 2 in the entire country. The other one also located in the same diocese, which means that students in so many parts of South Sudan cannot access primary school teaching qualifications.
Mūmbi, approximately what does it cost to support a student at STTC for a year? It's a 2-year program. But what are the costs?
So our recent numbers, of course, due to inflation, are at $4,800. And this means $4,800 covers everything: the accommodation, the books, all the materials they need. We print out a lot of textbooks on the property because we cannot access them, and we want every teacher to graduate with a pack to start off their life. But smaller costs are, for instance, it costs $100 to take care of a student for 1 week in terms of boarding expenses. So overheads, food, etc. And $30 to provide all the basic materials a student would need, a student teacher would need: pens, chalk, exercise books, etc. Yeah.
That's a bargain, I think.
Yes, when you compare with education in many parts of the world, that is quite a low sum money. Yes, but for South Sudanese, it's prohibitive. It's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So students at STTC come from a multitude of different tribes in South Sudan, and there are many significant differences among people from different tribes. I've heard from visitors and through videos of the students themselves that one of the most important experiences they have at the teacher training college is that they gain an appreciation for the differences among the students, among themselves. Somehow, difference, once it becomes more familiar, can be transformed into abundance and into giftedness, an extension of the learning experience. Did you experience that while you were there? Did you see that?
Yes, and isn't it true of all of us? Like when we other a person, then there's so much fear and anxiety about what they represent.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of tension in many parts of the world is driven by political actors who other certain tribes or certain groups of people. And the same for South Sudan. A lot of the conflict has been tribal. So the intentionality of solidarity with South Sudan in recruiting students, but also staff from different parts of the country. Literally, the teacher who recruits travels to every diocese in the country conducting interviews, and also to the Nuba Mountains in South Sudan, ensuring that our students come from every part of the country. I believe it's also an effort towards future social cohesion and reconciliation. And the students themselves, testify. I never knew they were like this. I never knew we shared this in common. And being there for Cultural Day was just beautiful. There are students who are minority, there might be 2 or 3, but other students would join in and learn their songs and dance and participate with them. There were so many costume changes in the course of the afternoon, and we ended the afternoon all dancing to one song, the entire student body and staff. It was truly, truly beautiful. It is something they look forward to because they take their practice very seriously. Yes.
That must have been a wonderful event.
It was very dusty, but beautiful.
So when I was in college, long, long ago, I was trained as a teacher, and in my mind, I have a picture of what a teacher training college looks like. The equipment they have there, the library, the resources, the technology. Tell us what STTC looks like. What equipment do they have, and what do they still need?
So first of all, STTC is a very small piece of land with one-story buildings all over. So very low. So no, when you think of colleges, you think of two-story, three-story buildings, none of that. They have a library, as you can see, and imagine this wall of books and another one on the opposite side and a few stacks in between. And it's considered one of the best libraries in South Sudan. Some mother houses have more books than this in their library. So you can imagine, that difference, yes? But we're considered to have one of the best libraries. They have a computer lab with a few laptops that are shared by all students, and not just by the students, but the students now have welcomed in one of the community building initiatives, children from the local community to come in in the evenings and on weekends to be taught computers by our student teachers themselves, which has been a great, great success. So there are these shared laptops. The students are very disciplined in caring for them and sharing them with one another. There's an open air dining hall. It's great in the dry weather, but not so great when it rains because the water comes in through the sides. The dormitories are like this. It's shared space, so shared bathrooms. And then a great open place, which is like an assembly hall. That's where Mass is celebrated once a week. So very bare basics, but still very resourced compared to many other institutions. Yes.
One more question before we move on.
Sure.
How many graduates of the Teacher Training College are employed as primary teachers in South Sudan?
So we have had 767 graduates, and they say 75% of them are working in the educational sector in South Sudan. Our students do sign a bonding agreement with their home dioceses to work for 2 to 3 years after graduation, and that's a commitment to that. So, and I think, the learning and teaching experience is so different. The bonding experience gives them a chance to try out their skills, and a huge number stay on in the teaching field, even though I have to note that school teachers are not well remunerated. Many careers are not in South Sudan. So when you see committed teachers, it's truly a love for the vocation of teaching and wanting the next generation to have a little bit more than they had.
Thanks, Mūmbi. I just noticed that we have a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what percentage of the people in South Sudan are Catholic?
I do not have the latest statistics, but I would say we are the biggest Christian group, followed by the Episcopal Church. Christians are the dominant group, which is very different from Sudan, where the dominant group was Islam, where South Sudan belonged to for quite a number of years before they became an independent country. Of course, there is a growth in Pentecostal religions, just as any other country in the world, but Catholics are a dominant number in the country.
Thanks for that. So when you left Yambio, where did you travel to next?
I traveled a short distance within the same state to a place called Rimenze, and it was a road trip. The Rimenze community invited the Yambio community for lunch on a Sunday. So I got a grand escort and we just drove over Amaram Road, and I can't tell you the distance in miles or kilometers, but it took about an hour for us to get there.
Mm-hmm. So Yambio and Rimenze are pretty close to one another. Was the geography similar? I know Rimenze is the home of the agricultural project, so I just wondered, oh my goodness, look at that jackfruit.
They are similar, but because Rimenze is not the town, so you even see more of the agricultural background. And being at our project there, where the various Solidarity members have worked so hard to plant and grow different things, even the atmosphere feels cooler. You know how the microenvironments change when you have more trees around. Mm-hmm. And yes, lots of fruit and trees everywhere. Another thing I have to mention about Western Equatorial State is that it's home to a tree called the teak tree. It's a hardwood. All the furniture you see like in the library is made out of that. It's a very heavy piece of wood. And you see that as you drive. Huge canopies of these trees, they have very broad, flat leaves. It's very striking because I had not seen that in other parts of East Africa.
Mm.
Mm.
So before we get to the agricultural project, tell us about the other different projects that are located in Remenze.
So Sister Josephine to the right here runs a kindergarten. Sister Josephine is the longest serving Solidarity member as of now. She has been there for 14 years. She's an RMDM sister. So there's a kindergarten a short walking distance away from the community. 3 years of education. As you can see, quite a good number of students. Next to the nursery school, which is a Solidarity project, is a primary school that is owned by the diocese, but we support it by paying the salaries of a number of their teachers. And we also helped pay for it to be renovated a few years back. And in recent days, they were able to add on grades 7 and 8, which was something that the community had longed for, so that the children would not have to go look for a different school to finish their education off. Also, after the conflict, IDPs traveled and settled in the area because, as you know, people seek shelter around church buildings, government buildings, because it offers a measure of protection. And an IDP camp grew up outside the church, close to the Solidarity House. And so a little program to the IDPs began. Over time, many of these IDPs left, but some, especially the elderly, settled in the area. And we have continued to support them by providing some food every month. But Sister Josephine is also building the elderly who have no family support, little houses called tupuls, for them to be able to live in and to feel secure in. Yes.
For internally displaced people, Remenze seems like a great place to arrive at for food and for safety. So it's good to know that Solidarity is doing all of that support for those people. About how many of them are in Remenze at any given time? Do you have an idea?
I don't have an idea, but I met with at least 40 of them who are able to walk and come over to meet and to get to know me. And the first thing they said, I hope you're not here to take Sister Josephine away. They have come to love and respect her greatly. She also speaks the local language, so they don't need an interpreter to work with her. And I also then took a walk with Sister Josephine in the afternoon to go see some of the houses that they'd put up. And I might even have taken these images, I'm not sure, but how proud they are to have a house and a space to call their own. And the first thing people have asked when they see these pictures, where are the windows? They ask not to have windows, and it's just as a security measure so that their things are not stolen. So, and they spend their days outdoors because of the heat, and they only go in at night to sleep.
So I got a little glimpse on the next slide of a familiar face for those of us who know Solidarity, Sister Rosa. And so you can't really talk about the agricultural project in Remenze without mentioning the magnificent work that was done by Sister Rosa in the past. Tell us about where the project is today.
The project has grown. The jackfruit you saw, that is Sister Rosa. These jackfruit trees line this magnificent little path down the garden. And actually, I encouraged them to name that street after Rosa after I left, because, you know, these towering jackfruits and demonstration kitchen gardens on one side that encourage people around Remenze in different ways they can grow mixed vegetables in a small piece of land. Because even as you think of land, they might have it, but during the dry season, there's no water. So how do you ensure that you have green vegetables throughout the season? As you walk further into the farm, you find where they have cows, you find where they have a piggery project. The piggery project is exciting because they give local farmers one pig to start off their own piggery project. Then they have a processing area where they process honey. We have a beekeeping project, but they also turn groundnuts into peanut butter. They make soy butter, they dry moringa and create the moringa leaves, but they also demonstrate to local women how to integrate new foods into the diets of their families and especially children, and how to make peanut butter, for instance, of their own. So sometimes we also give little grinding machines to be able to ground the peanuts manually at home. So there's so much activity going on at any one time here. There's a small loan project where, again, women are given a bit of money to start income generating activities. And I have to tell you, when I met with these women, what struck me, first of all, is how beautiful they looked. And I don't try to say this in any way to demean them, but there was this glow about them. And for me, it's the glow that comes about having the dignity to make choices in your life. And that is attached to having the financial means to do anything like that. So they're able to feed their children better. They're able to take them to school. They're able to buy what their families need. And that for me was the testimony. In just seeing how different they looked from many other in the area is a testimony of the success of the program.
It's really a gift to the people of Remenze and the surrounding areas, because so many local farmers have participated in that program and have been trained in sustainable agricultural means. What are some of the major crops that they grow there?
Yes, lots of sweet potato, lots of cassava, yucca, what you call yucca in this country. And yucca is really a drought crop in that you can use almost every part of a yucca plant for food. The leaves are a popular vegetable delicacy in this area. We serve it in our institutions. It's eaten by many families. The mangoes, I already talked about the mangoes. There are mangoes galore all over the place. They grow maize. What I was surprised as a Kenyan, and particularly a Kikuyu from Kenya, where we grow a lot of Irish potatoes. Irish potatoes don't do well in this part of the country. So they are unable to grow that. But I would say anything you put to the ground, because I even saw dragon fruit, can grow. That's how fertile the ground is.
So there's a really good possibility that if peace could come to South Sudan, they could be self-sustaining in terms of food.
If peace and then infrastructure is developed so that the food can make it to different markets, yes, it's very possible.
That would be great. And is some of the food that's grown in Remenze able to be taken to Yambio to feed the students and the teachers at the college there?
They do buy some of the produce from them as they can, but a lot of the produce goes to the local community Remenze, because this agricultural project, its reach is very wide. They have people they are training who would have to use a motorcycle to get to Remenze. So the reach of the Remenze project is extremely, extremely wide. And this couple is one of the IDP couples that stayed in the area because they had no family. And when I was there, the roof of their temporary hut had been blown off, but Sister Josephine was working on getting them a new tukul that is more durable. And the testimonies of these people just blow your heart, but their gratitude, the gratitude of for them to have a place to call home, the care that they get from solidarity, and it's such a humbling experience, and it's jarring, especially when you come from this part of the world. It's jarring to see how little people desire to make their lives comfortable.
From your experiences in Juba and Yambio and Remenze, what was the biggest takeaway that you had from this first part of your trip that will inform your work as you live into the role of president of Friends in Solidarity?
There are a number of things, but I would say is the expressions and desire for peace that I had echoed so many times. You know, in just interactions, you have not asked anything, but as you talk to somebody from South Sudan, they say, we just desire that our politicians would come to an agreement, take care of everybody, and we could have lasting peace. We desire we could go back to our home areas. You know, some of our, like one of our student teachers in STTC Yambio, who came as a student to us and then went to Nairobi to upgrade his studies and then came back, has not been home for 7 years. You know, he lost a parent, but he has not been able to go home because of the insecurity. So that repeated over and over again, but also the desire to be able to master your own life in having a marketable skill, education. The people of South Sudan love education. They take it so seriously, but there is a shortage of institutions they can go to, a lack of money to do it. So there is that great desire. But more so than that is, they said, tell them about us, that we are not all about despair, you know, and suffering, you know, that we are a proud people who want to build this country.
And they never lose hope.
Yes, many times they told me, don't forget us, but tell them about us. Tell them about us. Yes.
I know there are other places in South Sudan that you visited, Mūmbi, but we want to have some time for questions from people who are viewing and hearing you. I find it quite moving. You really are able to draw me and draw others into your experiences with the people of Juba and Remenze and Yambio. So I want to thank you for what you've shared. And I want to turn this back to Sister Mary Beth so she can take questions from those who are participating. Again, please put those in the chat. We want to answer the questions that you have. It's a wonderful opportunity. So before we turn that over, I see that Susan has put in the chat that part 2 of the hope that Mūmbi saw in South Sudan will be on Tuesday, June 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And during that time, she'll tell us about her visits to WOW and the Health Training Institute there, to Malakal, the farthest away project that you went to, and to KIT, which is the Pastoral Center for Solidarity with South Sudan, very close to Juba. So I'm going to turn this back then to Mary Beth and open up for questions.
So thank you so much, Mūmbi and Anne. And for our audience, don't be shy. Please put any kind of questions you'd like to ask in the chat box. And we'll wait a couple minutes for you to do that. I see that in the chat box, there are some wonderful comments from some of our audience saying how inspiring to see the people and hear the stories, and very encouraging and hopeful for the people of South Sudan. And many thanks to you, Mūmbi, for sharing the story and putting a face on this ministry. So here's one question. Mūmbi, what does the building infrastructure look like in South Sudan? Is there, for instance, a judicial system? Do they have internet? Is there any kind of university system or hospitals?
Yes, so it does have a judicial system, but is currently being reviewed and updated. South Sudan's peace accord was signed in Kenya many years ago. And for a long time, South Sudan borrowed heavily from systems in Kenya and Uganda, countries where a lot of South Sudanese had lived as refugees and in exile for many years. But now they're creating their own systems. And that is taking time, but there is a judicial system. So if you do commit a crime, there is a process, there are prisons. There is internet, but the cost of internet is mind-boggling. And when I was there, I would maybe spend 5, 6, 7 minutes a day using it because of how expensive it is. And it's paid for in US dollars, which tells you for most people, they would not be able to use the internet. And of course, the infrastructure varies depending on which part of the country you are in. A lot of our solidarity projects rely on solar energy because there still isn't proper electricity in the country. Hospitals, university system, there is a University of South Sudan and a Catholic University of South Sudan. And the bishops have worked to start campuses in almost all the dioceses that are branches of the Catholic University in South Sudan. However, they struggle with resources, with having enough personnel to teach who have the right qualifications, who can be based in these places. Hospitals, I visited one government hospital where our students train. There was no electricity. We train nurses and midwives. They deliver children with the light coming from their cell phones. So a lot of the hospitals and schools are the ones established by missionary groups and the church in different places. So in that little town, there's a Komboni hospital run by the Komboni sisters, which is now their resourced hospital, but this relies on donations that the sisters and the congregation work very hard to get from all over the world. So there's still a lot that the country needs. Many places do not have tarmac roads. I saw tarmac in Juba, not everywhere, and a bit of tarmac in Wau, but other places I went to, there was no tarmac on the roads. The history of the conflict is another question. The conflict, people say it's because of an equal sharing of power in 2013 that resulted in different groups. There's some truth to that, but the history of South Sudan is long and it goes back, way back. And part of it is because of the resources in the country and competing parties who want a share of it, but who also have a stake in it. And these forces are not just local, they are also international. There are several peace initiatives that have tried to be implemented. The different groups were in Rome as recently as March, trying to come up with a peace accord. They agree on some things, they get back to the country, the president makes a choice that then results in some conflict, either because of the political maneuverings that are going on. So the conflict is both a fight for resources, it's also tribal anger based on years and years of conflict. And of course, the animosity you feel towards a group that you feel have hurt your people or wounded you in different ways. There is a refugee challenge in South Sudan. They're expecting, first of all, 180,000 South Sudanese to return from Sudan because of the conflict in Khartoum, but they are also receiving nationals of Ethiopia and Eritrea and other countries who were either living in Sudan and for different reasons fear going back to their own countries. And it's a dire situation because I spoke with a priest, a friend who's at the border, who has been trying to help out, and there are no resources set up at the border in terms of health, water and sanitation, emergency food to welcome them. And the government has unofficially kind of indicated, we don't have the resources. We're not going to set up new camps to receive our people who are returning. They need to go back to their home regions. There were already refugees in Sudan. How do they get back to their home countries? And when you flee during conflict, you don't carry much with you. So it is a very dire situation right now.
Oh my. There is a question here about the follow-up to the Pope's visit. Is there any way you can assess how his visit contributed to peace in the country?
I have to say, when the Pope was there was actually violence that broke out in one part of South Sudan, in a smaller area. There have been a few statements issued, but you haven't seen the momentum you'd hope for. There have been a few statements issued, like over Easter, the Bishops' Conference issued some strongly worded statements to the politicians in the country, reminding them not just of the Pope's visit, but of the time they had gone to Rome on a retreat with the Pope, where he had knelt down and kissed their feet, which is a moment that many of us have never forgotten. A reminder of the promises they made then. But when you listen to people who are living there and what's going on, really it was like a blurb in time, and that has moved on, and people are back to the normal struggles in the country.
Oh my.
Yeah.
We have a question here. What kind of political pressure would you recommend to bring peace and positive economic growth? Do you have any sense of that?
So recently there was a high-powered meeting here in Washington, D.C., but it was pressure actually that was being directed towards the IMF and World Bank. You know, two institutions that have a lot of power over developing countries, but also asking them to erase the debt and to be kind of more reasonable in how they ask countries to restructure their programs towards self-sustenance. I know the person who has asked that question, and I promise to look for resources and share them with our audience so that I can give you some tangible things. But I would also ask that there are petitions going around asking the world to pay attention also to the conflict in Sudan, and I would hope that you could sign on to such petitions, because the futures of those two countries are closely intertwined, and peace or violence in one always affects the other greatly. There is a question by Cheryl about the state of secondary education. There are government schools, but there are also private schools sprouting up all over South Sudan. Teacher training for that level happens at the university level. How many South Sudanese do go to university? The numbers are not great. And so you find a lot of teachers who do not have the proper training, but are teaching especially in the government primary schools. The private schools that are owned a lot by religious groups and have teachers from other countries teaching in them because they are also for-profit institutions. But we remember, because of South Sudan's long conflict, a lot of their nationals spent time in Uganda and Kenya. And when you talk to the ones you meet who have degrees, they tend to be from those countries, or even from Khartoum in Sudan. And that is the population that's providing a lot of the workforce in South Sudan, not just in building the government, but also in the non-profit NGO world, because there are a lot of NGOs operating in the country. Thank you.
Well, Mūmbi, thank you so much. I really want to thank you for this informative triptych around South Sudan. I know you've only been in your position for less than 3 months, so you certainly have acquired not just experience of the people of South Sudan from your visit in February, but also so much knowledge about the ministries there, about the people. You know, you sound like an expert in only 3 months. So thank you. I'd also like to thank in a special way Sister Ann Aster for her really insightful questions and guiding us through this conversation tonight. Also to Susan Oxley, our communication coordinator, for taking care of all our technology and communication needs. To our very generous donor who has provided a matching grant of $5,000 for this webinar. And to each of you for taking the time out tonight to listen, to learn, and to reflect on the situation in South Sudan. I hope you're leaving this presentation really feeling hopeful. You know, this webinar focused on Sister Mūmbi's travels to Yambio, Ramenzi, and Juba. And as you saw in the chat, we're going to host part 2 of this series on June 20th at 7 o'clock to follow Mūmbi's travels to Wau, Kit, and Malakal. And so, in closing, let me repeat Pope Francis's meaningful words to the people of South Sudan. Never lose hope, and lose no opportunity to build peace. May hope and peace dwell among you, and may hope and peace dwell in South Sudan. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful night.